Hi everybody, this is Marcy Alancraig from Cabrillo College, and we'd like to welcome everybody to Course Assessment Basics, Evaluating Your Construction. Oh great, hi Rosaline at MPC. Thanks for coming again to one of our things. We would ask you to type in the name of your college and your role with SLOs on your campus, and to put your phones on mute by doing *6, and at other times we will be asking you to unmute your phones and talk to us. So we've got Rosaline, and who else do we have who's here?
Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Does it say Mike? It says log to my conference.
Oh, I see. There's people that are still trying to log on to the conference, and they aren't listening to the phone, so that's why we're hearing them.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Orange Coast College is here too.
Okay.
If you have problems logging on, when it comes to downloading the software, there's a small bar at the top of the page where it says Illuminate, and it's kind of yellow. If you click on that, it allows your computer to download it. Most schools don't allow something to be automatically downloaded. So if you're having any trouble doing it, that's the problem.
So we have Rosaline, and we have somebody from Orange Coast College.
Yeah, Vinta from Orange Coast College.
Oh, hi, Vinta. I just sent you an email yesterday.
Hi, I got it. I read it. I just tried to apologize. We're in a huge room, and we're not at our own phones there. I think now we're at the welcome. Let's see, we're still trying to find you.
Okay.
Probably look for something that it's called course assessment. So if you spot it with your see it in there. One assessment course. It'll be today. I wonder if it's at 11 though. Maybe
so, Vinta, just temporarily, since other people are logging on, why don't you, Chafee's just logged on, why don't you put your phone on *6 so that we can't hear you working through that? And we'll just ask the Chafee people, would you please tell us what your role with SLOs are by typing into the chat bar. And Marcy, I think you can probably go ahead and we'll just start walking through.
Okay. All right. So today we're going to talk about the whole wonderful world of student learning outcomes. And Janet and I always like to start off with a little talk about what you need dealing with SLOs. And we really encourage you to have a sense of play and a willingness to experiment with student learning outcomes. And also you need this ability to translate assessment theory and jargon into plain English. What we're seeing is we've been working across the state, and I guess we didn't introduce ourselves, so I'm sorry. I am the SLO coordinator at Cabrillo College, and I have been working with student learning outcomes since 1999, before the standards changed. And in addition to working at my own college, I've worked statewide with the Academic Senate, with the RP group, and then Janet and I both were project coordinators for the Basic Skills Initiative for a year, primarily doing a lot of work with SLOs. So I have a lot of experience with it. And Janet, do you want to introduce your background with SLOs also?
And my background was the same. I was working on my doctorate and read the background and sort of the federal discussion that was going on about student learning outcomes and assessment, and it made sense to me. And so I started working with them with my discipline organization, which is the American Society of Microbiologists. It's an international association. And in 1999, we wrote international SLOs for the first general micro class as undergraduates that would be taken all over the world. So you think coordinating SLOs on your campus is hard. I had the great experience of working with people from multiple countries. We took an entire day, 8 hours, where we worked them through, but we accomplished it, and they've stood the test of time until now. And I served as statewide SLO and accreditation chair, served with the Senate Exec Board, and have served on my own campus as an SLO coordinator, but done a lot of training around with RP and Senate. So I think Marcy and I, between us, we've traveled the state and we've heard lots of stories, and we're really excited to share with you today.
And one of the reasons that we put this slide up is from part of what we're seeing across the state right now, particularly as schools are starting to get panicky about getting to the proficiency level on the ACCJC rubric on SLOs, is that this rush to do things can lead to schools adopting methods of SLO assessment that are just fill in the boxes and aren't really authentic and arising out of the culture of the college. So we really want to urge you, as we go through this material today and as you're working on your campus, to really be willing to have the dialogue about what SLOs mean to us in our culture and how we can assess them in authentic ways and not go for the quick and dirty, because that we have found after doing this for so many years that is just not sustainable. So word of warning, and just indulge your sense of play and experimentation as we're going through things. Okay, so we wanted to test your knowledge of SLOs. So I'm hoping that everybody here is ready to do some typing in, because we need you to do that. We'd like you to type in your answers to the following questions. Here's the first one. Student learning outcomes and assessment are new fads that began with Dr. Spellings and the Bush administration. Is that true or false? Would you please type in your answer? And I'm not seeing anything coming up from anybody.
There we go. There's Rosaline.
Okay. All right. Vinta and gang. Great. What about Chafee? Well, as far as we're concerned, I don't know what you would call a fad, but student learning outcomes in of themselves have been around since the 80s, the early 80s, and they don't seem to be going away at all. And as a matter of fact, Janet, do you want to share a little bit what Margaret Eaton said at the last academic Senate plenary about what's happening in Washington?
One of the reasons why we ask this question is because for many of the faculty or the people statewide that are saying they don't want to do this, their reason for not dealing with SLOs and assessment is they really blame it on Margaret Spellings and some of the work that was done during the Republican administration. And last week at the ASCCC statewide plenary, Judith Eaton, who is the president of the CHIA, which is the National, let's see, I'm trying to remember, Council for Higher Education Accreditation is what CHIA stands for, said that if you think this is a political thing, that you think it's Republican or you think it's Democratic type thinking, you're completely wrong. With the budget issues that are going on in the nation and around the world, the issues that deal with being able to prove that students are learning is becoming more and more important, and we will not see these things relaxed. In fact, she predicted into the future that we will see even more accountability type efforts being taken on. While many of us look at Bush starting it, it was actually started before that, and now Obama's administration is definitely following it through. So it is not a Republican or Democrat thing. No political party change or regime change is going to change this. And what we need to look forward to is helping to give really good advice, because they are going to make decisions that affect education like never before. The federal government is going to step in like never before. And that's from a person that lives in the Watergate Towers right there in Washington, D.C. and is privy to all of the insider information.
So you could just take back to people at your campus if anybody's hoping that this is going to go away, that that's a pipe dream. It just isn't going to happen. So let's try another question. According to both the Academic Senate and WASC and the ACCJC, our accrediting agency, writing SLOs and designing assessment processes is a faculty responsibility. True or false? Would you type in your answers? Okay, so we've got some interesting answers here. Vinta said absolutely it's the faculty responsibility, whoever lovely person, okay, but you're qualifying it. It's campus-wide, yes. From OC said that it should be collaborative, and then Rosaline from Monterey said it's not just a faculty responsibility, but faculty do play a major role. According to the Academic Senate and to WASC, it is a faculty responsibility. And for the instruction part, the faculty are not responsible for writing SLOs and designing assessment and student services or the library, except for the librarians who are instructing the library classes. But it is a faculty responsibility. And collaboratively, yes, with your researcher if you need help, but really the full responsibility is supposed to lay with the faculty. Janet, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, I think that's really good. Marcy, okay. Could you see if you have a speaker on your computer, and if you do, could you just be sure it's turned down or off, if you have any speakers attached?
I do. There. Is that better? I just turned my...
Yes, that did it. Thank you.
Okay.
It was just causing a little bit of funny noise.
Okay. All right. Okay, so one more question before we dive in. The accreditation standards require that SLOs are written and assessed in courses, programs, GE, student services, or all of the above. Yeah. Okay, you are very smart students here. Both Vinta and Rosaline said all of the above, and yes, all of us are in this process as we speak. And I just want to go back to a comment that Vinta wrote about the faculty responsibility. The last question, Vinta said this should be added to the 10+1, which are the responsibilities that were... Oh gosh, I'm blanking. I'm having one of those moments where I'm... What's the bill that 10+1 comes out of, Jana?
AB 1725.
Thank you. I was just having one of those moments. AB 1725, and I think that's true. There's language in AB 1725 that you could extend to fit to student learning outcomes, but the AB 1725 was written before any of this was part of our accrediting process. So that's why that language isn't in there. But good comment.
Yeah, and let me just ask this. For those of you that are online, accreditation standards do require SLOs for all of those areas. Are any of those areas that are lagging behind on your campus? Is there like some areas of GE where you're struggling to get SLOs in assessment or student services or administration? If so, could you just type those in so that we can see what areas you're having to work with?
And Janet just put something in there that isn't on the question, and that is many colleges across the state are adding student learning outcomes to administration and writing administrative outcomes. That isn't in the standard, but it is something that people are starting to do across the state. Okay, so Vinted Orange Coast says GE is an area, MPC. Rosaline said that some departments in GE are further ahead than others. Okay. I'm not surprised. Okay. And Rosaline said she wasn't sure where Student Services is on her campus. And we just had Kay join us. Welcome. All righty.
All right, let's go on to the next thing. And I think most of you could define SLOs at the drop of a hat. But as Marcy and I have been traveling around the state, we're realizing that some of the problem with assessment, I'm going to say that a big problem that schools have in getting started with assessment is often that their SLOs are not clear and represent something else instead. So let me just start off by saying that an SLO is something that explains what a student can do or know, a skill, an ability, an attitude, a belief, an opinion, or a value. And so this is a very broad thing, and it goes beyond what instructors usually think about when they're developing their classes and what departments usually think about as they're defining their program. We, in education, we certainly like to be very detail-oriented so that we know exactly what we're doing and other people that look in on us know it. But an SLO is a broader kind of statement that generally includes a high level, such as these knowledge, skills, abilities, attitudes, opinions, those kinds of things that are relevant to that discipline. So we're just going to start off with something that we'd like you to give us feedback in the chat box. We want you to think about your favorite course. If you're not an instructor, think about a service that you give to your students or an administrative function that you perform on the campus. And we want you to think from the perspective of a student walking away from an encounter with you. What is something right now that just seems like a very big thing that you would want them to get from that interaction, either in the class, in the student service area, or in an administrative type of service field? So go ahead and type it into the chat box. And I know you're all thinking, we're not going to grade you on this. Sometimes things just come to your mind and you think, oh my gosh, that's something that I just wouldn't want a student to leave this interaction without gaining. So Vinta says library research, citing their resources or sources. Good. Anybody else have something they'd like to type in?
Rosaline, as a researcher, what about the people who use your research? Maybe this wouldn't be what students could get from you, but what would faculty?
Oh, okay. Let's see here. Oh, good. Okay,
good.
Yeah,
great. Okay.
Definitely see that. I see Rosaline's answer there. I know that initially, before I started with SLOs, as if anybody else would like to type something in, please do go ahead and do that. And just to cover up while people are thinking or typing, in microbiology, when I first started working with SLOs, my mind went directly to the details, the content of my microbiology course. But as we began assessing things and then talking to the program that our students go to, either transfer or nursing or physician's assistant, we realized that the outcome they wanted to see from our students was not content specific, but rather more along the lines that Vinta was talking about, that they were able to access the information, judge whether it was valid or not, and then use it in a specific situation. So it's been really cool to see how our concepts have kind of grown from a more discipline-oriented, content-oriented area of thinking a certain outcome was important to relating that to what the where our students transfer and what's needed of them in the real world. All right, if nobody else is going to put something in, we'll just move to the next slide then. And we want to remind you that SLOs require higher level thinking and skills. That's with regards particularly to Bloom's taxonomy. And I'm not sure if you all have seen the really awesome new Bloom's taxonomy diagram that's out there that was created by people that do online classes. But it's a couple of concentric circles where Bloom's taxonomy is in the middle, and on the next level are the kinds of assignments or assessments that could be done with each one of those levels. And then on the outside of that is the type of product or actual tool that would be used for that assessment. So it sort of spins out from each one of Bloom's taxonomy levels, where with an SLO in higher education, we're talking about evaluation, analysis, and synthesis of ideas. Also in that, I guess it's just because they're IT-type people that put this together, but they also talk about the fact that really a high level of knowledge is creation. And for me, that means that that's a product that's a result of synthesis, analysis, and evaluation. You can create something that's original or something that uses some of the foundational knowledge that you've learned or the foundational skills you've learned. SLOs should also synthesize many discrete, smaller stair steps or smaller skills that a person might acquire in the class. They should not be so narrow as, being able to, for me in microbiology, streak a plate. That would be way too discrete. It needs to be much higher. What would streaking a plate be used for, and how would it be applied in the real world? It should require students to apply what they've learned and not just regurgitate what they've learned. It should result in some sort of a product, which means that there should be something you can both see and assess. And that product might not necessarily be something they've built. It might be an oral report or a presentation or a dance. It just should be something visible that is higher level application of the foundational information they got within the course or within the student service or within the administrative service. And then the product should be able to be evaluated and assessed by faculty. And I've just recently been putting together a little resource booklet for a college here in California so that they can see what sorts of assessments are going on around the state. And one thing I've found as I've been doing the research is that a lot of people have written the SLO and they actually have a product that's being made that is great in many instances, but the faculty stopped short of having a really good way to evaluate or assess that product. So it's almost still gut level type assessment of what's going on. And many people need to formalize the criteria used to do that. Okay, Marcy.
Okay, so another little question for you. And please type in your answer. Course level SLO. So now we're talking on the course level. Should cover discipline knowledge, discipline skills, discipline values and beliefs. D, answers A and B only, or all of the above. Put in your vote, please. Type it in. What do you think? Okay, everybody's agreed with V. Everyone's agreed with E, and that is correct. But I want to caution you about values and beliefs are really appropriate in certain disciplines and not appropriate in others. And part of this is where I started with student learning outcomes. When I was first learning how to do this back in 1999, the first outcome I wrote for a literature course I was working on was that I wanted students to love literature by the end of the course. And I realized that asking them to have that value or belief to feel a particular way was not appropriate in my discipline. If they could read literature, analyze it, write about it, then they had succeeded in learning the material, even if they hated it. I was asking them something of them and myself that wasn't appropriate. On the other hand, my ECE colleagues need to graduate people from ECE programs who enjoy being with children and want to teach children. And in nursing, you don't want to have people who don't like sick people. So attitudes, values, and beliefs are really appropriate in some fields and not appropriate in others. So that's just my word of caution.
And Rosaline's asked an excellent question. How do you assess attainment of discipline, values, and beliefs? And actually, I've seen several methods by which people can do that. For me, in the area of allied health, there are several case study type ethical questions that you can ask that are direct measures. Yes, you can use indirect measures such as surveys, and I know our behavioral science and criminal justice area actually do use a student survey to ask them about their perception or their belief regarding certain kinds of values in law enforcement or in behavioral science, psychology, or sociology. I was just really impressed in Georgia by a nursing, actually it's called, wow, I'm just at a loss for the name of the program, but it's where they take medical records and then they put them up on the web so that they're available to everybody. And so these are people being trained on the aspect of medical records in an allied health major. And so what this faculty member did was she gave them a case study, and an excellent case study now would be the story of the woman that was shot in Arizona, the legislator, and the fact that some of the medical records of some of the victims were released to various people, to various media services and things like that. And so the students were asked, yes, the Giffords, so the students were asked, which of the following areas would be an ethical breach of your role as a person that has access to specific medical records? And it went on with, where did the breach occur, and some really detailed, direct information to find out if the students knew exactly what the threshold was as far as revealing any information to no information to only necessary information, asking the person what their connection was and getting the evidence that they actually were connected to the victim. So there are really good direct and indirect methods to evaluate values and beliefs.
And I would add one more thing to that, and that is that people demonstrate their values and beliefs by how they treat other people. So I know that our ECE department faculty do observations of interactions between the student teachers and their pupils to look at how they demonstrate, say, they're caring for other students or things like that. So there are ways to get direct measures of that. A survey, an indirect measure like a survey, I don't think I would trust as much if I were trying to assess that in my students, because they'd all give me the answer they think I want to hear. And Vinta says, I ask a pre- and post-survey questions that lead to beliefs, such as knowing about the connection between citing and plagiarism. That's another way to get at it also, about what the change has been for students. Okay, so we wanted to talk about, this is an area of confusion. I'm sure you probably all know this, but we just wanted to go over again the difference between a course objective and an outcome. Objectives describe those small discrete skills. An outcome asks for the synthesis of those skills. Objectives usually require basic thinking skills. Identify this. What's the date of that? Outcomes use higher level thinking skills, analysis, synthesis. Objectives do not necessarily result in a product, and outcomes should result in a product. So I'd like to move on to the next slide to give you some examples of what we mean. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I forgot there was this chart. First, this is a chart out of the Basic Skills Handbook that Janet and I wrote, and we just really wanted to give you the overall, another way to see that difference between objectives and outcomes, looking at what the scope is, and that's what we kind of just covered. The target area for them, what's the major influence, inputs, kind of nuts and bolts for objectives, and then outputs for outcomes, looking for observable evidence. What can the student do? And then let's get to a key question that really is a conundrum for a lot of people across the street, across the state, not the street. How many? There can be numerous objectives because they're really specific. Outcomes should be limited in number, 5 to 9 at the most, to facilitate modification and improvement of teaching, and also assessment. You have to assess every outcome that you write, so you want to make sure they're getting at the really big things.
And Marcy, you actually tell faculty to start off with 2 or 3 and then add if needed. And the 5 to 9 is really there because in science we have 5-unit classes that meet 9 or 12 hours a week. And so you wouldn't expect there only be 2 or 3 outcomes for that. There will be safety outcomes and a variety of other ones. But after years of doing this with people, we are definitely saying start with a small, sustainable, and manageable number. And then if you say, wait a minute, there's this other outcome that really is necessary, add it. But don't try to make an exhaustive list. And absolutely don't just scratch off objectives and change it to outcomes, because in many areas, in CTE, career technical areas, and such as nursing or even our wood shop, those objectives can be pages and pages, 50 or 60 per section of the course. So please keep it simple as far as this goes.
And all of this should arise from faculty dialoguing together about what is really important for the outcome in this course or the outcome in this program. My lovely English department and I adore it, but we can barely agree on anything, had the most fruitful discussion as we were trying to come up with SLOs for our composition sequence, and we realized that we have only 2. One's a reading one and one's a writing one, and that goes all the way through the sequence, and it's describing how students can read and write in our most basic course and how they progress from that to college-level English. That became the really important, wonderful thing that united our department and got us really clear. So sometimes having to reduce down gets you down to what is the nub about what we're really teaching here, and can be a wonderful source for departmental agreement also. So I'm glad that you like this chart, and we'd just like to give you a couple, an example if you don't already have this drummed into your head. This is from Mission College, I believe. They're reading SLOs for 2 levels below college level English, and you can see that they have 3. Utilize vocabulary skills, determine and differentiate main ideas, and make appropriate inferences. So they took the 3 most important major skills, and that's how they did their outcomes. I want you to look at their objectives, and not all of their objectives are here. I had to take them off because they wouldn't fit on the slide. But can you see the difference about how tiny and small those objectives are? And look at the verbs that they're using. Identify, identify, identify. Those are lower level thinking skills compared to what's being asked in the SLO. So there are many, many, many examples of those across the state. We wanted to pick a basic skills one for you to see. But we hope that that's helpful to really give you a visual of that difference.
Okay, so let's move on now to really where people seem to be getting stuck around the state, and that's assessing the SLOs. And the reason why we wanted to go back through just chatting about what an SLO is again is because as you get to the assessment stage, you may find that you really didn't have good direction or a good foundation in your SLO, which should act, from my perspective as a scientist, as an hypothesis for some type of learning that you think is occurring, and the assessment then tests to be sure that that's happening. So what is assessment? It is an ongoing process. So I think, number one, Marcy and I are just really hoping that people grasp the concept that whatever you decide to do, it should be sustainable. And whatever you decide to do should be modifiable. I know in my department of biology, we've modified ours over and over, and we just completely threw it out and started off with something really great for next year that we're so excited about. And we think it's going to work very well, but it would not have worked if we thought we were creating a tool that we would never change, and if we thought the work would just be done by getting numbers. So then the assessment should also be something that is very explicit and clear, not just to other faculty in the discipline, but to the college-wide audience and to the public, to the students. Also, the assessment should measure if students have met the outcome. And one of the reasons we changed our biology assessment was that it had morphed into something that measured different pieces of the SLO, but not the overarching ability that the SLO addressed. So we changed our tool, and we're jazzed that we're going to actually measure what is stated in the SLO, and it was reversed. We didn't have to change the wording in the SLO. We had to change the tool. And then faculty should get information that is actionable. They should be able to make changes in the classroom, with students, in the program, in the student service, in the administrative service, in the college as a whole. For my college, many of the assessment processes that we've been using have told us that we need to reorient some of the things and some of the ways that we're teaching things between departments across the institution, not just within one course or within one program. And then another major outcome has been that we have found that we need to connect up so much better with student services, and in many cases with administrative services, where we have not been explicit and clear, and some of the outcomes are not being achieved because of that lack of clear understanding across the institution as a whole. This I'm just going to read to you. It's a quote from Thomas Angelo, which Marcy and I both love him. And he's quite a character. But he says that he's been around doing assessment since before Marcy and I have, and he's been a prolific writer and done a lot of things to really help people understand assessment. So what he says is assessment is an ongoing process aimed at understanding and improving student learning. So I want to just focus on that first bullet for a minute. It is not aimed at generating data, and it is not aimed at a checkbox. The purpose is to understand and improve learning, because that's why we're here.
And it's not aimed at fulfilling the requirements for accreditation.
Right.
It's about student learning.
It will fulfill them in the end if you target student learning. It involves making our expectations explicit and public. It involves setting appropriate criteria and high standards for learning. And what we realized in our biology assessment was that we had the appropriate criteria, but the tool we were using was targeting an even higher criteria, like A-level students instead of C-level students. It systematically gathers, analyzes, and interprets evidence to determine how well performance matches those expectations and standards. And this is where Marcy and I have the concern about sustainability. So as we talk about assessment, we're constantly asking people, how will you gather this data? How will you meet to talk about it? What venues have you got planned before you ever do the assessment that will allow you to look at the information and make changes?
I'm sorry, Janet, I want to add one more thing in here. It also is, this is a faculty responsibility, because when you systematically gather that data, only faculty who have discipline knowledge and knowledge of those students are going to be able to analyze and interpret the evidence about their field. I know that we got a lot of wonderful help from our researchers, and Rosalind, I'm so happy that you are there. And my researcher has really helped me do a lot of things, but ultimately he doesn't have my knowledge of the discipline. So this is a place where faculty really have to be active and are important in this process.
Right. And by the way, I just picked up my latest copy of the rostrum, and if you look at the back page, this would be a flex activity. And so in an era when we don't have money to pay for people to go get flex elsewhere, this is absolutely under one of the allowable flex, Title V flex definitions, where we're improving our delivery of education. And then using the resulting information to document and explain, and then to improve performance. And this is really where it connects in with budgeting and planning. When it is embedded effectively within the larger institutional systems, assessment can help us focus our collective attention, which has been so cool with regards to basic skills. Oh my gosh, if you haven't seen the statewide discussions that are going on, the dialogue, and then even the numbers that the Chancellor's Office is putting out. By focusing our collective attention as a state, we're really making changes, and other states are still flat as far as trying to affect any changes in the basic skills needs in their areas. It helps us to examine our assumptions, and for me, I call these the surprising moments. You know, you get back data and then you think, what the heck? What is this saying? And it's really what's been enjoyable and somewhat funny sometimes and somewhat discouraging. But we realize that if we do not articulate our assumptions, we're going to end up with some very strange ideas as we analyze the data that we get. And then it creates a shared academic culture that's dedicated to assuring and improving quality of higher education. And I can just say, for us in my biology department, there were some touchy conversations when we were examining our assumptions. There were people that had assumptions that were very high level because of their world experience, and others that had very low level assumptions for student learning and performance. And as we've created a shared academic culture, we've been able to actually just move forward and say, great, we can all agree to this level. Now we can do something about it. So that brings us to WYMIWIG, which I hope some of you have had. It's described in detail in the Basic Skills Handbook, Chapter 15. But it stands for what you measure is what you get. It's a little takeoff of that IT WYSIWYG, having to do with what you actually type in is what you see. So a remarkable thing that I think we've learned in many areas is that it's not so much what you say. It's not even so much what you do, although that's more meaningful than words. But what you actually assess students on is what they leave with in long-term learning and long-term memory. So it's very important that you understand that every assessment you give is a teaching experience. And every time a student gets back the graded results, it is a learning experience. And so we want to just talk a little bit about formative and summative assessment and the role in that. If truly what you measure is what you get, you should not just measure it as a summative or a final kind of assessment. You should use it as that teaching tool. So, Marcy?
Okay, so here's a handy little slide on the differences between formative and summative assessment. And Rosaline, pop in here if there's anything you would like to add to this. But formative assessment is done while the learning is in process, and it's to help students improve on their performance. It's giving feedback while they're in the process of learning. It's low stakes, and as a faculty member, this has been so helpful for me. It acts as a diagnostic tool so that I know if they're really getting it. It doesn't help me if by the end of the semester I realize they haven't gotten it. I need to know that in the course of as I'm teaching so that I can adjust things all the way along to make sure that people are getting the ideas that I'm teaching and the writing that I want them to do. So examples of that, CAT stands for Classroom Assessment Techniques. Those are those wonderful one-minute papers. What was the most important thing you learned today? What was the most confusing? Quizzes, homework, any of those little things that you do during the course of a course to check in with how a student is doing. Summative assessment, on the other hand, is done at the end of learning and is the final evaluation of that learning. Very high stakes for the student. It's used to evaluate student performance, and we're talking about things like final portfolios, major assignments, final exams. That's where you're really taking a look at what a student has done, and these are the kinds of things that are often used to assess SLOs, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about methods, but those are the differences, and I would say that faculty need to be able to use both of those things. Rosalind has a wonderful comment here. She said, we've also talked about having students keep journals in college success courses as a formative assessment. Which is a wonderful idea, have the students reflecting on what they're learning and keeping journals as they're doing that. Janet and I also taught a webinar just a little bit ago on the neuroscience of learning, and one of the most amazing things that we learned as we were writing the Basic Skills Handbook and about some of this new neuroscience is that students need to be able to reflect on what they're learning, otherwise they're not going to retain the content. So that's a really wonderful formative assessment technique.
I just want to share. Oh,
go ahead.
I wanted to share one of the cool things that's happened statewide with regards to assessment. Some of you, if you don't have a big non-credit program, you won't be aware of this. But you know, there are non-credit institutions in the California community colleges, and all of those courses that are in those institutions or those portions of the institution are ungraded. So we are actually piloting giving progress indicators, which for the credit side of the house, it's the same as grades in our mind, of pass, no pass, and satisfactory pass. And this is going to be a fundamental paradigm shift if in the end the non-credit faculty decide to promote using a written assessment of every student, because right now they don't. Everything goes as ungraded to the chancellor's office, and therefore all accountability for non-credit is impossible. So as the faculty have been starting for the first time, unlike credit, starting for the first time thinking, oh my gosh, how do I assess my non-credit ESL students? They developed these great summative assessments where they sit down with the student and they go through some performance skills, and then they go through some basic synthesizing of information to create a sentence or tell a story or whatever. And they realize this is not the best thing for our students. We need to back up and do a certain number of formative assessments so that's just as formal as the summative. They sit down, they talk to us, they know what to expect, so that our summative erases those variables of student nervousness, not knowing what to expect, never having been asked these types of questions before. So it's giving me this incredibly great opportunity to look at a section of our education that's never even done formalized assessment with criteria that were written down, anything more than the faculty member had in their head or had talked about, and see them go backwards and realize and emphasize the importance of the formative assessment with regards to the quality of the data in the summative.
Okay, and I want to go back. Vinta, you had a comment here that you wrote that says formative assessment helps students understand SLO assessment better than summative. And maybe you could unmute your phone and explain what you mean by that. I'm not sure what you mean, and I'd like to hear more about it. That's a very interesting comment.
*6.
Yes. So if you just hit *6, you're unmuted.
Okay, go on.
Okay, so if you want it, we'll maybe type in a response to that. That's just very interesting. I'd like to hear more about that. So we just wanted to do this for you again. This should sound really familiar to you.
There's Vinta.
Oh, hi, Vinta.
You wanted to know about the comments I made, you said?
Yeah, I would like for you to explain that a little bit more. Why you think formative helps students understand SLO assessment better than summative?
I looked at the rubric, and I was in the Senate, and our academic Senate president here is where it's program review coordinator. But and I had mentioned that in the rubric, it does say that students need to be aware not just of our SLOs, which are on our syllabus, but how we're assessing them. And that's why we're trying to measure, whether the SLO is met or not. But I could see how formative would allow the students to be more involved in the process and aware of not only what the SLO is, but now the next step of how we're assessing in the class and assessing them and their learning as compared to waiting till that final and then they're gone.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good point.
That's true.
I was talking about even my work cited, I do it towards the end, just before the final. It's like, this is the end. I don't always have that much time to really go back with them, though I try before they're done and the semester's over, and maybe help them learn what they got wrong. It'd be easier if it was earlier, somehow. As much as we can come earlier, so there's time then to correct it and work with them, and instead of just, telling them, okay, this is the final project, and you didn't do so well, and they're gone. They're already moved on.
Right. Sometimes you don't even get to tell them what they did wrong because it's summative. They just give it to you and leave, and you never see them again.
But we do find a lot of our faculty are still using final exam, and this goes against that. We have been telling them to try more formative, but you're right, that does not allow them to really have learned from it or to be involved in knowing specifically how they are being assessed and then given a chance to improve that before the end of the semester for another assessment.
Right. Okay, so let's just go back to this for just a moment. This slide, SLO assessment this should sound familiar to you, require higher level thinking skills, ask students to synthesize many discrete skills, ask students to apply what they've learned, result in a product, and that product must be evaluated. That's the same definition that we gave you for what an SLO is. To measure it, you have to measure it at that same high level. So having a high-level SLO and measuring it by asking students to identify dates in a history class is not an accurate measurement of that SLO. Does that make sense? Janet, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's great. You're just aligning the SLO with the assessment at the same high-level, application level, synthesis level, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question. Which of the following are methods for assessing, now we should have taken out the word course, but which of the following are methods for assessing SLOs? A major assignment graded by a rubric, a portfolio, embedded test questions, projects, all of the above. So go ahead and type in what you think. Good. Okay, and it is all of the above, and I'm sorry that we focused it so much on a course. I want to share something that isn't here that was just to me seemed so brilliant at LA Southwest College working with their TRIO program. Their goal is to get students from high school through college and to have a goal and to know where they're headed. And there are a lot of deadlines and a lot of key tipping points that the students have to know and understand to be able to make it to their outcome, the TRIO program outcome that their grant is based upon. So the method of assessment that they used was a pre and post exercise, and the exercise was a fishbone diagram. So in your mind, think about the backbone and the little ribs coming off of a fish. And to begin with, they had the students mark what their desired outcome was. and then to record in there not necessarily dates, but when specific things had to occur for them to reach their outcome with regards to the courses that they take and when they would apply for scholarships and when they would apply for specific programs or transfer. And then they work with the students throughout the time, whether that's a semester or a year or whatever. And at the end, they have them redo the fishbone diagram. So it is definitely a product. It definitely assesses the higher level things that the students had to get out of that TRIO program. And it's very different from the things that we had here on this slide. But I thought in student services, such a brilliant sort of quick down and dirty thing that gave them great information. They were able to look at it and say, whoa, wait a minute, you know, students didn't realize that they needed to have this done before they did this next step. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the types of information that you want to target out of your assessments. And we've already talked about this just a little bit, but we're going to only concentrate on two major sort of venues of data that you would want to be sure that you at least consider when you're assessing either a program or a service, and to some extent you want to at least consider it in a course. So the first is direct data, and then the contrast to that is indirect data, both very important types of data to get. The direct data would be to evaluate exactly what the student can do. And an indirect alternative to that is to ask the students or to ask others to evaluate the student's skills from their own perspective. So for instance, when we have employers assess our x-ray techs as they leave the program, that's indirect data. Direct data is maybe if we look at how they scored on the RAD Tech certification exam. Another type of direct data is expressed through any kind of work that you can evaluate, such as a picture or maybe a play that the students produce, or possibly a product that they've created in our engineering department, in contrast to what a student thinks they can produce. So they might say, well, I know that I can do this automated computer design system. But saying that they can do it and actually seeing what they do when they do it is very important. The difference between direct and indirect data as far as usability is that if a student tells you they think they know how to use a CAD program, computer-assisted drawing, and then if you have them actually do the direct data assessment where you have them do something, it helps you not only to find out whether they could do it or not, but when you see what their own perception was, it helps you change what you're doing. Just looking at the fact, the direct data that they can't do this right, or they missed putting the windows in according to code, you can see that in a direct data test, but you may not know how to improve it without the indirect data, where you realize that they didn't even know how to correctly assess their own abilities.
So Rosaline asked a really good question, and I was going to jump in here about my own students. She asked, have you found that there's a difference between what students can do versus what they report that they can do? And I just want to tell you that in my English courses, for every paper that the students write, they have to grade it themselves using my rubric for the class. Rosaline said, I'm trying to get at the reliability of indirect data, and I have found in my own classes, this is repeatedly over the years, that students tend to undergrade themselves, not overgrade themselves. So if I asked them to report on how well they did, they would say they didn't do as well as I thought they did, even though we are using the same rubric. So that's an example of, I think a lot of cynical teachers think that students would report higher than what their actual ability is, and I've actually found it to be the reverse for the most part.
And I've found the same in science, that they're more ready, if you ask them to put it on paper, to underestimate their ability, and then when they're actually given the project to work on, they're actually able to do it better, and that's given me an excellent perspective, because part of my teaching is actually coaching and stopping them and saying, do you realize that you totally get this now? Do you realize that math, drawing a graph of this medical data is no longer driving you crazy? You just drew a beautiful graph. But if you don't give students the time to reflect on what they do, they sort of fall back to their previous notions that they had about themselves before they took the class. So, and then as far as indirect data goes, and to Rosaline's question, as far as the reliability goes, I would say that the major determining factor on the reliability is how clearly you've articulated the criteria. If you've clearly articulated the criteria and given examples of what a very good accomplishment of that criterion is, the students are better able to give you indirect or their own perceptions on that. If, on the other hand, you're not so clear on it, then I think you end up with a lot of indirect data that is just all over the place. And then, in addition, all of these CESI, the surveys of students that we've got, and even the component of CESI, which is faculty perceptions, there's a certain weakness that's embedded in all of that. People respond with their perceptions that are not only based on the real and actual, but are based on the sort of the talk that's going around. So if you look at the NESI and the CESI results, almost every school in the nation has really bad counseling and really bad parking. So there are certain things that, okay, if every school in the nation has this, what's the deal here? I think it's a separation or a dissonance between what we know we can provide with what we've got, the resources we've got, and what students discuss or talk about or have the most trouble with on a daily basis. Because if you also look at the CESI and the NESI, you're going to find out that less than half of the students actually ever go to a counselor. So how did the majority of them state that the counseling isn't any good? So I agree with Rosaline. There are problems as far as reliability goes, but I think the clearer you are with your criteria, the better you've got that narrowed down. So in direct data, the setting is usually pretty confined and structured. And in indirect data, it's usually less confined and a little bit less structured, although I've seen some very specific focus groups where you end up with great perception data that is so specific and so helpful to improve. But in general, we kind of think about if you're asking for people's perceptions, you kind of let them go a little bit beyond certain boundaries. So examples are exams, papers, projects, performances, portfolios, etc. for direct. And indirect then would be surveys or questions or focus groups or opinions that are outside of that. So let's just do this then. What is this, direct or indirect? Number one. What is polling information on who people will vote for in an election? And we've just had a whole lot of polling information about Donald Trump. So is that information about Donald Trump direct data or indirect data? Go ahead and type in your answers. Yeah. Right. So it's indirect data. It's people saying, I think that I'll vote for, or somebody else, not me, that's actually registered to vote will vote for this. So in contrast to that then, the actual vote count reported after the election occurs would be the direct data, right? So just sometimes as we're thinking about this, the reason why we wanted to ask these kinds of questions, and I've got one more slide of questions to ask you, is because I have been looking. We just had a big SLO assessment institution-wide meeting yesterday where we all presented the assessment that we're doing in each of our areas, both administrative, student services, and instruction by department, on poster boards, and we kind of rotated between all of these. And it was very obvious when I got to certain areas that were doing assessment that every bit of their assessment was indirect. There was not a stitch of direct assessment there. And when I asked them, why are you making these decisions based on completely indirect data, they didn't even know what direct and indirect was. Although they had been taught it at one time, they didn't have a picture in their mind of what that was. So that's why we give the election information. And then here's another one. People's opinion about their favorite make of car, is that direct or indirect? You want to type in your answers? Yeah. So that would be indirect. And then if we were instead to actually look at what the automobiles are that they purchase, that's going to be, yeah, good, direct. So when we think about students, what we want to do is we want to say the difference between what they think and say and perceive, it is important. It may not be as reliable as the direct data, but it is important in helping us massage the closing of the loop. It gives us ideas about how to improve what we're doing. But the actual information that tells us how well that outcome is achieved is most commonly the direct information, where we can eliminate all those other variables. So then, Marcy, you want to head off with the qualitative and quantitative.
Yeah. So now we're really getting down to how do you apply this in an educational institution. So quantitative data are data with numbers that you can crunch. Qualitative are some of those indirect measures, or not necessarily indirect, but it doesn't have numbers attached to it. And this is a big debate we're having at my institution right now. So we wanted to give you a case study here, a kind of scenario, and see how we could use this. So a faculty member is convinced that field trips are the most effective way to teach geology, but this is impacting the budget. Which data would be most convincing in a budget description? So I'll read through this and then type in what your answer is. A narrative on the benefits of field trips, that's qualitative data, or a collection of student opinions about field trips, which is indirect data, that could be qualitative or quantitative. This many said that. An example of student grades related to topics covered on the field trip that compare with the scores of students who went on the field trip, and that compare the scores who went on the field trip and those who didn't, so that's direct data, that's quantitative, or a list indicating the number of other institutions and geology programs that support geology field trips as an integral part of the pedagogy, which is indirect and quantitative, or a combination. So Rosalind already has her vote in there. What about you, Vinta? Okay, so you both say a combination, and we agree. And we wanted to put this up to just show you that you can use both kinds of data in a really effective way. The statistical data can point out a possible problem. The qualitative data indicates how you might improve or address that problem. The direct and indirect data provides a holistic view of not only the skills or knowledge, but also the perception of what is going on. And then, the cynical faculty member in me says it also depends on who you're presenting it to, and if you're trying to convince the budget people. And at my college right now, the quantitative data would probably be more convincing than the qualitative, because we're looking to save every penny that we possibly have. So some of this is audience, but in general, with SLO assessment, a combination of qualitative and quantitative is the most efficacious for giving you information about our students' learning and what can you do to improve that learning. So here's another one. Oh, and Rosalind has a question. As the IR, or a comment, as the IR person at my college, I usually encourage folks to use both types in reports and presentations. And bless you for doing that.
Really?
Thank you, because I think they're both really important. So here's another one, and we wanted to know what you think of this. An ESL instructor has discovered from feedback from her students that the most important outcome they are hoping for is proper pronunciation when they speak, which would be the most useful type of assessment data both for the individual student and for the course outcomes as a whole. A, direct statistical data from a multiple choice test about the fundamental rules in pronunciation, which will give you quantitative data. A national standardized ESL test, which also gives you quantitative data. The student logbook created as a result of listening and analyzing recordings of their own speaking, which is qualitative. Or an interview developed to assess pronunciation and evaluated using a rubric that indicates the major types of errors and a narrative summary of the overall pronunciation expertise, which could be qualitative and quantitative, or a classroom speech evaluated by comments by fellow classmates. So if you're trying to figure out which would be best, what do you think? Rosaline says both C and D. Vinta, what about you? Oh, you both agree both C and D. Okay. As an SLO coordinator, I would say to this, oh, and there you are, Orange Coast person, C, D, and E. Okay. If this is a performance objective for the SLO for the class, that students will be able to pronounce things properly when they speak. For me, D is the best way to do that because they are being assessed, they're being asked to perform the task that they are being asked to do, and there is a rubric that will give them feedback on how well they're doing that or not. The student's perception, the qualitative data, may be interesting for them, but it doesn't provide them with the feedback they need for how to improve. And so also with C, the logbook, created as a result of listening, is also their perceptions. But D is the one where the instructor is giving them feedback on this skill that they are being asked to perform.
So it is true that all of those provide really great, C, D, and E provide really great information back to the student. As far as actually meeting the outcome, I think the D would give you the best information about that. But I really want you to consider then why it is that at the end of so many programs that we teach, particularly in CTE, why it is that we fall to the standardized test. And this is happening more and more. Judith Eaton shared that this is a major push by the federal government to use these standardized tests for areas where skills are really more important than content knowledge. So I think knowing exactly why and the value of the data that we get from each of these assessments is going to become so much more important as we go into the future, and we have to argue why, a multiple choice writing exam doesn't really tell us how well a person can write.
And I can testify that that is true because that's what we use as our assessment. Our placement exam is a multiple choice exam, and we don't ask students for a writing sample, and we switch to that for budgetary reasons. And we are finding that students are misplaced in courses because you can learn how to take an exam, but it doesn't mean that you can write a paragraph or an essay.
All right. So let's talk about some models for assessing classroom SLOs, and then you all can add in, if you can think of some administrative or student service
library.
Examples. Yeah. Well, we call library student services, but I know it's instruction in some places, so it's kind of hard to cover it all. But so one thing that we've found has been very good in a number of areas on our campus is simply to agree upon really good embedded test questions, and then have everybody within a particular course. So that means every section, whether adjunct or full-time, whether a part-time classified worker in a service area or a full-time person. We have everybody embed those same questions and we compare them, aggregate the data, and look at what the results are. We kind of keep close to our chest the unaggregated or disaggregated information so that people don't feel like we're using this to evaluate them. But I have to say that our experience is that over time, people ask for the individual data and they want to know how they compare to somebody else. They just don't want somebody outside in the community or maybe an administrator at district headquarters necessarily looking through that without the context of what the results were. So embedded test questions, we have found that for many, many, many disciplines and many service areas, embedding a test question within the work that's being done as the semester progresses has been very useful here at BC.
Alrighty, so I wanted to talk a little bit about Cabrillo's KISS method, and KISS stands for Keep It Simple, Sweetheart. We have at our college one of our major ways, in addition to embedded test questions, the major ways that we assess course SLOs, program SLOs, or our core competencies, which are our institutional SLOs, which also double for our GE SLOs, is that we ask faculty to choose a major assignment that they already give that they feel addresses the SLO. And that usually, going back to the discussion we had with Vinta earlier, that usually is an assignment that does happen at the end of the course. A final research paper, a final speech, a portfolio of drawings made in an art class. But students know all along what those SLOs are because they're on their syllabus and faculty are teaching to those SLOs. So they're getting formative assessments all the way along, depending on the instructor, that most instructors are doing that. But then they do this final thing, and it's graded by a rubric. So faculty are using an assignment they're already doing, the only new work for some faculty, if they're not already addicted to rubrics, and believe me, it gets them addicted to them pretty fast, is to create a rubric. And then many of us are using it also as a teaching moment by giving that rubric to our students and having the students assess their own work using the rubric. But then it gives you data on when you look at the grades and you look at how students do, or for a particular part of the assignment, if you're only assessing in an English paper, if I'm only assessing the critical thinking they're doing, I'm looking at the part of the rubric that deals with that as opposed to their grammar use, say. That gives me information which then I report back to my department about how well students are doing, and we share all of that together and then analyze what we need to do to improve teaching and learning. So the main method here is using an embedded assignment that's already given in the course. And this is part of what's made our method be sustainable at Cabrillo. So it's using an embedded assignment and then coupling that with a rubric, using that to assess things.
So now I'm going to talk about a project. So this is like a capstone project that we have in our engineering department. We discovered by looking at our student learning outcomes that we had a lot of students that wanted to go into engineering, a huge number, like sort of like the pre-med number that come in and, you know, most of them never make it through and never transfer. And that we could better serve our students by giving them some sort of an experience in a course early before they take too many units that would not be useful to them later, in a kind of a combination between career technical education and the automated computer design for manufacturing and engineering. And it's a pretty difficult course in that it makes them produce, the entire course is directed at producing a project. And it uses a lot of math, high-level math, calculus type stuff, but it also includes the CTE really cool machines they've got over there. It includes that you have to have a lot of confidence in working with computers. And at the end of the semester, the students must create a specific project that's been given to them with some leeway, a lot of leeway actually, for creativity. And then produce a PowerPoint that explains all the technical aspects of what they did and a hypothesis about how well the project they built will work. And then the final is they take these little projects out and they test them. So let me tell you what a couple of the projects were that people have done. One semester they created tops, like toys, and they designed them out of aluminum, and then they used the computer-aided design and manufacturing tools that we've got over in CTE to actually have a computer put this in and create this object. And then they did their PowerPoints on what kind of math they used to determine how wide it should be at the top or the bottom, or whether it should have little wings coming out of it, and or whatever the thing that they chose to be creative about. And the final is they stand out here in the hall in front of where my office is, and they throw the tops. And they see whose top lasts the longest 3 out of 4 times. And base it upon, then they apply that back to some of the critical and fundamental information that they've gotten throughout the course. At this point, then, the teacher sits down with them and says, you know, it looks like you really struggled with the calculus. Do you want to continue struggling, or do you think maybe you ought to consider a CTE option instead of engineering as your goal for your education? So that's, another project that they did was they actually made hearing aids. And then, of course, you test them by seeing how well a person that has a hearing disability can actually hear when they put that hearing aid in their ear. So real hands-on, totally awesome thing that they used as a result of several years of looking at outcomes data that most of the engineering students weren't making it through the whole series. And then changing our entire institutional perspective on this.
So, Janet, that's great. It's making me laugh because our engineering department does something similar, only they do, let's see, one year they did boats going across the pool, little toy boats going across the pool, and kites, and they've done all sorts of other kinds of things, and it's actually a campus event that people go to witness these engineering projects and whose works and who doesn't work. It becomes something fun also.
Yeah.
Okay, in my lovely English department, and this is really common in a lot of departments across the state, we use a portfolio process for at the end of both of our 2 levels of English that are below college level. And we ask students to assemble a portfolio that includes an in-class writing and 2 out-of-class writings and a letter about what they have learned over the course of the semester. And those are read by, let's see, I think at this point the faculty member is allowed to read it, as well as 2 other faculty members who are not those students' teachers. And it's graded on a shared rubric that we have just, our first attempt at that rubric was so general we didn't feel like it was working very well, so we've just rewritten it. And we are experimenting with acceleration on our campus, and we have several projects going about looking at trying to get students from 2 levels below English to college level English in a semester. And it is this portfolio process that is the final arbiter about whether a student is deemed ready to skip or not. So this has been another great way to have dialogue across the department and my department. We argued about every possible aspect of this that you could possibly have. What can be in that letter, how many in-class assignments it should be versus out-of-class assignments, all of those things that we have come together in this wonderful way and are doing this. And like I said, it's happening in many, many departments across the state. So that's an example of the use of a portfolio, and I know that in our photography classes they do the same sort of thing.
And I just wanted to share that it's not only in courses like English, but in our culinary arts program. the capstone class where the students are finishing off their culinary arts series within the program, they are required to create a portfolio that includes recipes for a variety of different types of food. They have to take pictures of the way that they display that food. They have to include a series within the portfolio that talks about food safety and food handling. And that portfolio represents the final assessment, the summative assessment of all of the activities that they've done in that culinary arts program. So it's pretty cool.
And here's another one from Cabrillo about culinary arts. Because, Janet, you're just reminding me, our culinary arts students also do a portfolio, but their final is that they have to cook a meal in our restaurant for a group of 6 invited guests, which usually include a few family members, but then also selected faculty members get to be a part of that, and then you rate the dinner. And that is part of their grade, and the people who are eating the meal rate the dinner along with the instructor. So again, it's another hands-on assessment of what students can actually do.
It's so much fun.
It is so much fun. I angle to get invited to those all the time. But you have to really have a good in with the instructor to be able to get that. Cabrillo is just adding pre- and post-testing as one of our approved methods for assessment. We had a situation at Cabrillo where our faculty senate decided what our assessment methods are, and there are only 2, and now we're adding a 3rd. And the pre- and post-testing is to deal with some of the SLOs that we have in a lot of our let's see, it's not called PE anymore, kinesiology classes and dance classes that read something like this. Perform with an increasing degree of proficiency the skills, techniques, and strategies of blank sports, softball, basketball, tennis, yoga, any of those kinds of things, or particular types of dance. And that kind of SLO really lends itself very easily to using a pre- and post method as a way to measure it.
Right, and then I'm just going to end up with a capstone experience that students have at our college, and that's a case study that they do in their last course, pathophysiology, where they have to use information they've learned through their entire program. It's a pretty simplistic case study in that we only ask 12 questions, but we have had so much fun working between all of the faculty. There's 12 of us, as we consider what is first a C-level question about this case study, what requires higher level skill thinking, what would be an important thing that we want them to leave this course with being able to evaluate or synthesize if they were to meet this patient in an emergency room somewhere. And as we've sort of delved into asking the questions and determining what works best, we realized, wow, if we just had 5 or 6 different capstone case studies, we could just alternate them throughout the years, and no student would ever see the same case study as they go through the program. And so we were able to actually use the case study as a pre and a post test, in that we give it to them when they start off, and then we give an equivalent but different case study that gets to the exact same information but in a different scenario at the end. So it's kind of a very interesting pre and post kind of a test. But it gave us great information about how well our program is helping students to retain information over time. So those are just examples of assessments that Marcy and I have on our campuses we wanted to share. You might have some good assessments too.
I'm sure that you do have good assessments. And Georgie wrote a comment. Hi, Georgie. Nice to know that you're in on this, too, about these are really good examples that will be most helpful and even inspiring for faculty. And I'm sure that you all have some assessments, too, that you could share methods for assessing, because this seems to be where people are struggling about, okay, so I have my SLO already, but how do I measure it? So we wanted to give you an activity to do that. Go ahead, Jan.
Well, so we were just going to ask you, what would you use to assess, maybe what at the very beginning when we asked you to think about a major outcome, and Vinta actually wrote in there her outcome of having students be able to do research and cite the source correctly. What kind of assessment could you think of that might involve something you're already doing, which is the way that Marcy and I always talk to faculty about? You're already doing great stuff. A&R is already doing great work. What's something they do that they could turn around and create into an assessment? So we'd like you to just type in, or since there's not that many of us, you can *6 so that you can unmute your phone and tell us some kind of an SLO assessment that you have found has been really good on your campus.
I see you are all feeling bashful at the moment. You can type in, too. Rosaline, I want you to think about how you're a teacher. Oh, there you are. But you are a teacher, though. You, as a researcher, you are a teacher to the people who come to you for help. Okay, so Rosaline, you wrote, you're not a teacher, but following up on your recent meeting with the GIS student, you asked him to share his mapping project with you after he completes it. Right, so that you can look at it. And I think you are a teacher. I think this is one of the most wonderful things about SLO assessment is to realize that all of us across the campus are involved in learning one way or another. You might be working with faculty and teaching faculty. Student services personnel are working with students and acting as teachers as well.
Yeah, and then she continues to say that demonstrates that he's able to use the demographic data that she actually gave to him and then visually show it in a product. Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. And then Vinta said writing assignments. I was just going to share this yesterday in our little SLO. They called it like a jazz meeting or something because we had a jazz band playing and the wine and the food and all that. And over in our academic development area, they had done a poster on pre and post testing that would display how well a student could cite sources, because this is the academic development one level prior to transfer, where they really need to be nailing down this skill of citing their sources. And I was standing next to our librarian who was saying, oh, you know, we test for this as well in our library research course. And so we were talking about how interesting it was that the first tool that they decided to use was, it was a multiple choice question, and it said, which is the correct way to cite a journal source in the following, and then they gave these A, B, C, D, E, and people were supposed to pick out which was right prior to taking the class and after taking the class. And while they got a slightly higher bump after the students took the class, the faculty in academic development were not very happy because they really expected people to do much better than that. And what they realized is that none of them ever do that without looking at a resource. Like, they all have their little MLA handbooks there. And when somebody even comes up to them in the library after years and years and years of doing citations, they still just double check it. So they redid the tool, and they gave the students a little sort of summary of some of the key MLA concepts attached to the multiple choice question test, which meant they weren't then just guessing, but they were actually able to go back and look at a resource and see if they could use the resource, which is the actual way in the real world we do this. I mean, even writing my dissertation, my gosh, I would be embarrassed because between page, 342 and 343, I forgot exactly how to assess stuff. So I would always look it up. And so those kinds of activities and talking with people and realizing we're all having these same sort of realizations of what makes a good assessment or not was just so gratifying, I think, and so helpful because the library hadn't yet gone to saying, okay, you can use an open book test, but the result was much better when they were allowed to look things up in the way that any of us with our doctorates do anyway. Okay, so we're going to go to the next thing, this is our last topic, and this is closing the loop. And it's very interesting. In our travels around the state, while this term is used pretty widely, we find out that people think of closing the loop in many different aspects. So Marcy and I are going to define it as the final step in SLO assessment. Without this step, you haven't actually done SLO assessment. And that embedded in closing the loop, you must have time to reflect on the data. And in reflecting, we mean not just thinking yourself about the context and the meaning of the data, but really talking to people that are discipline experts and talking to people outside of the discipline, because when you cross student service boundaries and administrative boundaries, you end up getting some very excellent input that just makes that data so much more valuable. So a time to dialogue with colleagues afterwards about how you use that data and your reflection and analysis of that data to improve teaching and learning. And then just looking at the fact that SLOs should be part of, it shouldn't just be a loop. It's more like a spiral staircase. And it's part of every level of the SLO assessment. It's part of the course and student service assessment. You want to close that loop and see the improvement. And you're not going to go around in a circle again. You're actually going to go probably a step higher and improve it. And it's going to be part of program assessment. It's going to be part of institutional assessment. And you're working up in a continuous climb to better and better things. And, you know, we've fallen backwards on some things. Sometimes you go down the up staircase. But usually when you get time to actually close that loop and think about, well, why did this set us back instead of forward, you actually end up being able to progress at yet even a better rate. So this is the closing the loop diagram that we all use, and it begins with developing or modifying or reviewing a curriculum, a course, a program, a service, and administrative service. And it goes on to developing or modifying the student learning outcomes that dictate what you want to get at the end as a goal. Designing, measuring, and looking at ways that you can get to that outcome. Collecting the data and discuss it. And then, again, discussing the refinements. And I think something that we fail sometimes with is that we forget that this is really a reflective thing, and some people are more reflective than others, so you need to build some time into the venues between the collection and analysis and then determining the refinements. Not a lot of time because people forget, but you need to give people time to reflect and to actually kind of stew on what it is that they're finding.
Okay, a few words of final advice to y'all about all of this from Janet and me. Kiss, 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 kiss. Keep it simple. Keep it safe. This should not be tied to people's individual evaluations in any way. And the best way to kill SLOs on your campus is to make sure that it is. And that people feel like they're going to be judged for it, so that there's no room for failure. We suggest focusing on just one or two SLOs at a time. Part of what I'm starting to see around the state is people are so panicked about getting to proficiency that they're doing a whole lot of them at once. They're doing them as quick and dirty as they can and are leaving out the discussion and reflection part. We are just getting it done as fast as we can so that we can tell the ACCJC that we have done all this. And that doesn't lead to anything that's very authentic, sustainable, or anything anyone wants to do again. We also suggest that you start small, completing an entire loop with one course or a series of courses, and see what it teaches you. And as Janet said they're doing at Bakersfield, no, this isn't carved in stone. You're going to keep changing. It's an iterative process, right? Did I use the right word?
Iterative, yep.
Yeah, iterative. Okay. And keep assessment of faculty responsibility. Don't give it over to others. get help from others when you need it, but it shouldn't be something that you're asking your poor researcher to do, and faculty don't have anything to do with this. This is something a faculty need to do. And Janet, do you want to talk about this last one? This is your passion.
Yes. So what a lot of people have been asking for us that are working on the BRIC project to do is just either tell them an assessment that they can do or give them a little checklist and they can just check it off and do it without all the dialogue. So what we're going to post on the BSI website is sort of an exhaustive list of assessment types that people can consider with the upside and the downside. I mean, portfolios are great, but it really is time-consuming in evaluating them. So we give pros and cons of both. And we're going to say use this as a dialogue point. Hand it out to faculty and say, which of these best really assesses what your outcome that you would like to assess are, and how could you modify it? And rather than just picking something off the shelf, let's make this your own assessment that suits your student population and suits the community expectations of students completing this. So we're going to post this on the website along with, I'm also going to post that new levels of knowledge, sophisticated knowledge, and how you can get to some new and different kinds of assessments about it. But remember, it's the dialogue that's always going to be the best aspect of it. Don't fall to the simple and the easy. Don't sidestep the dialogue, because in the end, that's the only way that good things will come out of it.
And I want to add, it's the most fun part also. What we do is really isolating those of us that are in the classroom, and we don't get the opportunity to talk with each other enough about what we do. And the way that we have done it at Cabrillo, this is tied to program review, and we use our flex time that you have to have meetings where you talk about it, and it is such a relief to know that once a semester at least we're going to talk about what's happening in the classroom and not the budget and not parking and not all the other things, whether we can get, ever do a hire again or any of the other things that we worry about, but we're actually going to be talking about teaching and learning. It's delightful.
It really is. It's the best.
The best.
All right.
Okay, so we wanted you to, we wouldn't be good little SLO people if we didn't ask you, so what are you going to be able to do with what we've talked about this morning? Can you write down one thing that you are actually going to do, that you are going to apply from what you've learned in the webinar? And we really do want to see those, so type away, my dears. Okay. Rosaline says, I'm going to talk to some of the faculty involved in BSI funding. Oh, that's really great. About using both direct and indirect measures. That's wonderful. And Vinta, an idea for a workshop next fall on teaching and learning. Oh, great. And getting beyond compliance. How wonderful. Those are wonderful ideas. Great. Yay, go forth. So we have a little bit of time left if you want to unmute your phones if you have any comments or questions that you would like to share with us or with the entire group. Oh. Okay. Rosaline said right now some of your faculty are at a loss about how to begin to assess the effectiveness of their intervention. So they really do need some help on how to measure it, it sounds like. I hope that this will give you some ideas that you can suggest to them or for workshops for them to do that.
It is hard for faculty to assess their interventions because we become such great owners of our interventions. Oh, we know this is the panacea, this is the prescription that will make everything better. So it's so hard to do that. But I think this is where the researcher has a really great role in saying, okay, why did you think this was going to be effective? What would an effective intervention actually look like? Write down specifically what that would look like in a student. And then sometimes that provides some of the key points for assessing that intervention. And thanks for your nice comments, Rosaline.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything from Vinta or from Georgie? Okay. If not, then we will say goodbye. Thank you for your participation in this webinar, and we just hope that you can use the information that you got today. Oh, thanks, Vinta. We really enjoyed doing this with you all, and we just hope that we can get beyond compliance to really doing things that help our students best. So we'll sign off here, stop the recording, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.